Okay, David, so thanks for giving me some time today. And for the folks that don't know Imply that well, and I will be honest, that might include myself, perhaps you could give us a little bit of a background on, when the company was formed, why, and some of the sort of achievements, the milestones on the roadmap today.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, great to meet you, Phil. So Imply, we are the company that was founded by the original creators of Apache Druid, and that is a real-time database for analytic applications. We were founded back in 2015 by the original creators of the project, and our mission in life is really about developers. There's kind of a really interesting trend that's happening right now in the world where developers at leading companies like Netflix, Confluent, Airbnb, Target, and others are starting to push the envelope in terms of what analytics can bring inside their organizations. And so developers are actually at the forefront, and they're building out what we call analytic applications. And it's much different actually, Phil, than the previous world where up until now, people thought of analytics, they're thinking of dashboards, they're thinking of executive roll-ups and reports that are given to executives, line of business on an infrequent basis. What's happening right now is a significant trend that developers are actually being tasked with building out applications that are much more real time, much more operational, being used to really drive core business processes and applications, and really at the forefront of how people build out software, how they build out cloud services. And so we're there with a really awesome set of technology that now enables the developers to build out those kind of apps.
Okay, and for those that don't know, Project Shapeshift and Apache Druid, can you give us a little bit of background of what they're about, and they're again sharing their plans? I guess most of these things have some kind of roadmap, so it'd be good to understand where we are and where it's going.
Yeah, so the whole idea and concept behind Project Shapeshift was the opportunity that we saw some time ago, that there's been this movement right towards modern analytic applications, and about 1,000+ companies are currently building out applications in production using our underlying technology. And we see this opportunity kind of like a catalyst, a point in time where every organization that's building out software, building out cloud services wants to build out these kind of apps, drive the shift in how they think about analytics. And so Project Shapeshift is all about making it easier for developers to build out these apps. And so when you look at an open source project, a distributed, scale out database, what you typically think of is as you grow out the environment, there's more work involved. There's work in terms of scaling up infrastructure. There's work in terms of managing the underlying database. For us, we really want to make that developer experience really easy. So we set out a journey and announced it back in November of last year, which is all focused on a 12-month initiative where we're aligning our roadmap to make it easier for developers to build out these kind of applications. And so Project Shapeshift represents 3 core pillars. One is cloud native, one is simple, and one is complete. And it's all about changing the developer experience and how we enable our developers to build out applications with ease, but also how we expand the underlying architecture of Apache Druid to be more capable to do more things for developers.
Okay, and I'm guessing that speed to market is increasingly important, as you say, with particularly with data. We're familiar with the historical, as you say, data that gets given to the board every now and then, but we're talking about real-time analytics where people are maybe walking past a storefront and you're analyzing that traffic and what offer you might be able to give them there and then, as opposed to next week. So as I say, speed of developing an application. Someone comes up on a Monday with an idea, by Friday you can have the app up and running, or even faster in production. Is that right?
I mean, speed is absolutely right. Speed is impactful in a couple different areas from our vantage point. I think you address time to market. Absolutely right. Developers aren't looking to stand up a database and run it and maintain it. There are definitely lots and lots of customers that want to do that, but increasingly you see that developers and engineering teams want to spend their time on the core application, not the underlying infrastructure. And so for that reason, there's a speed to market dimension. You talked about kind of in the real world, in the environment, how people interact with analytics needs to be increasingly faster. And so for that dimension, I'd look at it from 2 parts. One is about the freshness of data. Real-time analytics for us is both about data freshness and the ability to not wait for a batch process to be completed on a infrequent, once a day, once every other day basis, but actually as data is created, the ability to analyze it instantly. So there's a real-time nature and a speed dimension on freshness. There's also a speed dimension in terms of the response time that you get for a query. So when you ask a question of a database, you would ideally get the answer back instantly. If you ask another question, you want to get it back instantly. So query response is so important, because when you look at the use cases that are being powered by Apache Druid and Imply, you're seeing that instead of analytics yesterday, which was all about a report, which you already know the question you want to ask. What was the current metric of supply chain? What is the current financial snapshot? Like, you already know the question. What's happening in analytics today now is that you don't actually know the question. There's no pre-computation of the query. You want to be able to take your raw data set and you want to be able to ask every question, just keep firing at it one by one. And so there's a speed dimension in terms of how quickly you can get a response. And that's actually, Phil, where the challenge is, as well, is because you have to have the right underlying database to be able to support the interactivity that's required on the massive amounts of data that's currently being generated in the world.
Okay, and that, I'm thinking, brings us to the main reason for our conversation today, which is Imply. You've recently launched Polaris, which is a cloud database service. So it would be good to understand what that is, what it does, and clearly end users are always interested in the benefits. We want to know about how it's been built, but also, what does it deliver to the customer?
Yeah. So we're really excited, Phil, because this is a cloud database service, not like the traditional sense that you would expect. And what I mean by that is, when you think about a database that's running in the cloud, what developers and architects typically think about is a hardware abstraction, and you're removing the underlying compute and storage infrastructure. You're making it easy to deploy the database. You're making it easy to scale the database. You're making upgrades for software very easy and visible in the background. That's what everybody thinks about. When you look at any database that's running in the cloud, that's what you get. It's the hardware abstraction with a pay-as-you-go business model. For us, we see that as table stakes. And so when we wanted to build out a cloud database service that was built for Druid, we knew we had to address that aspect, but we wanted to think broader relative to how a developer builds out an analytics application, which requires us to look at the end caps. Because when you think about how a developer builds out an app, clearly they need a database, but they got to think about how data comes into the database. And they also need to think about how data gets out of the database. And so when you look at the peripherals on the input and on the output side of things, you actually start to recognize a lot more work that has to be done by the development team. Specifically, what I mean by this, Phil, is that when you think about data ingestion, one of the really strong differentiators for Apache Druid is the ability to natively ingest streaming data from Kafka and Kinesis. This is why when people are architecting their data infrastructure for streaming pipelines, that they rely on Druid, because of our ability to scale, our ability to have low latency relative to streaming data. But from a developer standpoint, you typically have to work with third-party tools, third-party systems, and infrastructure to be able to support a Kafka deployment. But what ends up our Kafka integration, for that matter. But what we thought about with Polaris was, how can we make the experience even easier for developers? How can we allow them to connect into data as it's generated? And from that standpoint, we introduced a built-in push-based streaming service that allows us to natively connect into the source data. So let's say, for example, that you're working at a company that's building out a new cloud application for something. It's called the next Uber or the next Netflix or what have you. You're generating a massive amounts of logs and telemetry and metrics. From a developer standpoint, in the past, you have to go stand up a Kafka deployment, manage that deployment in order to get data into the database. What we're doing now with push-based ingestion is that the developer that's building out that application, they can simply call our API that sends data directly into the database without having to stand up infrastructure in the background. And the reason that's possible is that we have a built-in Confluent Cloud streaming service in the background as part of our cloud database that makes it capable to do push-based ingestion. And that's radically simplifying the amount of time it takes to get data in. So then you look at the other part about, okay, well, once you have a database and you're able to issue queries and you're able to get insights, how do you actually present that to the end users? And when you think about end users of applications, those can be end users that are inside your organization, or increasingly they're end users outside of your organization. And so what we did as well for developers is we built in data visualization that's native to our cloud service, that instantly as data comes into the database, you're able to visualize those streams and that all of that data and get insights right off the bat, slicing and dicing data, doing pivot tables, getting the kind of insights that the end users are looking for. And role-based access control makes it very easy for internal and external stakeholders to be able to see the insights instantly. And so we're talking months, if not years of time savings for a developer, not having to work on the front end UI, but also not having to worry about the input of data coming into the database itself. And so we see it as an end-to-end single integrated experience. And for that reason, that's why we're really excited about Polaris.
Okay, and I'm guessing that you've had some customer testing, pre-launch beta testing, whatever. Be just nice to have some, share some of that feedback from customers. Were there things that you have added from that feedback, or were they pretty much happy with what you'd built and couldn't wait to get their hands on the real thing?
Yeah, I'd tell you, I've talked, I don't know if these are public references, but I've talked to beta customers, and they were customers that are already customers of open source Druid and Imply. And it is awesome to see the response that's coming back, because in the past, people would say to us, hey, Imply, we don't want to be an expert in Druid. Druid is a highly optimized architecture designed for these analytic applications. And they're saying, we don't want to be an expert in knowing how the database needs to operate, how to optimize it, how to tune it. We just want it to turn on and let it run for us. And we're getting that response now, because the way that our beta customers are interacting with Polaris, they're up and running, building an application in minutes. Like it's awesome. And so the feedback has been really solid. We've eliminated dozens and dozens of tuning parameters. We've brought in intelligence to help monitor the performance of queries so that you're always fast, always on. The resiliency is happening in the background. So in a cloud environment, we're taking care of all the resiliency for customers, which is what they obviously want in an application. And so for that reason, it's been very, very exciting to see so far.
Excellent. And maybe it's a bit greedy because this launch is obviously now quite exciting, but I believe as well that you have given a preview, if that's the right way of phrasing it. You're going to be introducing at some stage a multi-stage query engine. So again, I don't know what you can tell us about it, but it'd be lovely to find out what that is, and again, what benefits you're hoping it will be bringing to your customers and end users.
Absolutely. So kind of segmenting the two announcements. So one announcement was all about the developer experience, right? Through a cloud service. The second announcement is really about an architectural expansion of the core database itself. And so the way to think about the multi-stage query engine is it kind of requires a little bit of context in terms of understanding what is the core Druid query engine today. So as I mentioned earlier, the way that we architected Druid was to have a query engine that was highly optimized for very, very fast sub-second performance on massive amounts. We're talking terabytes to petabytes of data, high concurrency. And so the essence of how we're able to achieve that uniquely in the market was through a single stage query engine. It was called formerly a scatter gather architecture that was designed to make it really efficient to be able to process data very, very quickly across lots of, we're talking billions and trillions of rows of data. Well, that architecture is really good at one thing: interactivity, right? If you have to slice and dice lots of data, this architecture is optimized for that manner. What we're finding from developers is that beyond interactivity, they want to do other use cases with their data set. They want to be able to generate a report. They want to be able to do complex alerting schemes. They want to be able to do these new capabilities that exceed the kind of inherent architecture of Druid, which what ends up happening for a developer is they have to end up dual loading their data set with another system like a Spark or a Presto. And that obviously means more work for the development team. And so what we natively did was we introduced a multi-stage query engine that works, seamlessly integrated with our core query engine that's supporting those new analytic use cases. Things like reports, things like data exports, things like, querying external data tables. And what this is allowing us to do is increase the capabilities for developers. So now they have a single one-stop shop. if they have to do interactivity, if they have to do reports, if they have to be able to do long running queries, they can do it all on one database architecture. And so this has become a revolution in our space, because not only is the real-time database market like starting to explode and a lot of new vendors coming into the mix, but now we uniquely have the most capable database for these use cases that can span interactivity to reports and everything in between. And so we're really excited about what this architectural expansion means for, the community at large for Druid, but as well as all the other developers out there that are thinking about building analytic applications.
Again, and maybe sort of widening the picture a bit in terms of the database as a service market more generally. How would you characterize it? I mean, are we still in relatively early days, or are most companies already understanding and using this kind of opportunity? And I guess also interestingly, never satisfied with one answer myself, but in terms of the future, how do you also see that sort of future of this kind of, I guess, cloud databases, if that's what we call them, over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what you see in the market today is that the world is looking for easy, right? The world is looking for easy. The world is looking for pay as you go. And within those two dimensions, cloud databases are obviously on the rise. It's quite normal now at this point in time that any developer who's thinking about building out a new application for analytics, or even for transactions for that matter, they're thinking about cloud first, right? That's an obvious thing that's happening. What I think is really interesting in that same vein is that in the past, people have thought about databases as transactional databases as well as analytic databases. And there's an interesting kind of trend that's happening now. And so when you look at companies that are on the transactional side, companies like MongoDB or Cockroach, I mean, they're all cloud native, right? But they're databases that are focused for transactional processing. And when you look at what's happening on the analytic application side of the house, Druid we see is clearly at the forefront in being able to provide a seamless, fully managed database as a service to support analytic applications. What that means for developers is that because of cloud, it becomes very easy for a developer to use, quote unquote, a DevOps experience where they can choose the kind of service they need to build out their application. So if they have an application that needs to service both transactions and analytics at the same time, it's so easy for them to now use cloud database services that are purpose built for the use case. So in the past, it's like, okay, you only had one database called, Oracle, what have you, right? And you have to be able to force fit that architecture for everything. But now you have specialized services that make it better for developers because they can easily use the right database without having to stand up infrastructure. Because back in the day, before cloud, you had to stand up an entire cluster to support your on-premises transactional application, or stand up your entire enterprise data warehouse for some type of analytic use cases. Now you just simply call an API, call a service, and now you have the right database for the job. And I think that's a general trend that's actually happening overall.
And in terms of embracing it, I mean, there are certain industries, research and development, I guess oil and gas and stuff, they've done some serious number crunching over the years. Are those companies, organizations in those kind of industries, are they also embracing this? Or are they still thinking that they know best in their own, sort of bespoke applications and need their expertise? Or are more and more of those kind of people working out that it is actually, for a number of reasons, beneficial to embrace the sort of cloud database model?
So there's a really good question here. So trends overall relative to the industry. So the way I would answer that question is a couple-fold. I think, my experience has shown over the last several years that every industry is embracing cloud. Think about data sovereignty, data controllership issues. Maybe some workloads still remain on premises, but the industry at large is recognizing the opportunity for what the agility represents with the cloud. So cloud databases are going to all industries. What I would add as a level of dimensionality would be relative to Druid and our database, the use cases around analytic applications. That's what's really interesting because, the core database that we represent, Druid, has been in existence for the last 10 years, right? And so it started off with digital natives, companies like Airbnb, Netflix, that were adopting the technology because they saw a competitive advantage to bring to market analytic applications that they can expose to internally as well as to end users. Twitter is a great example of an Imply customer that gives analytics to their end users. You would consider those digital natives, right? what we're increasingly starting to see is that not just the digital disruptors and the digital natives that are adopting these kind of applications and bringing them to market, but we're starting to see your traditional, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 enterprises. You're seeing companies like Target that are fully embracing the notion of real-time analytic applications, and they're making a very big deal in terms of how they're able to go to market with these apps. And so I think increasingly we're starting to see all these different companies that are building out these kind of use cases and apps. And so it's a really exciting time in the industry, because it's not just the digital native companies that are getting value and being competitive, but all enterprises at large are recognizing the opportunity to build out analytic applications and use cases.
Okay, and maybe just before we finish, it'd be good to understand, obviously you shared a lot of information about recent launches and developments, but if you're able to share any of the roadmap moving forwards, what we might be seeing from Imply over the next 12, 18 months, be lovely to hear what's going on.
Yeah, I think what we can share publicly is that, our mission is very clear and crisp, and that's really about being the developers, choice in terms of the database they need for analytic applications. And so we're going to continue across Project Shapeshift, and that's about making it more cloud native, making it the developer experience simpler and simpler, and then increasing the capabilities in terms of what the architecture can do. And so you're going to see some really cool things coming from us over the next couple quarters throughout the rest of this year.
Yeah, and maybe just finally, for folks that are looking at this area, cloud databases, what one or two pieces of advice would you give, when they're trying to evaluate the best sort of way forward? What sort of things do they need to look out for to understand, what might be best suited to their needs?
Yeah, it's as a developer, as an architect, you live and die by your SLAs, right? And so as developers and teams are recognizing the need to build analytic applications, there's lots of databases out there. I mean, there's literally hundreds of different databases they can choose for to build out their apps. And it all comes down to what is the SLA that you're trying to hit, and how do you get the easiest experience in order to hit that SLA with the right database tool. And so for that standpoint, it comes down to Druid was architected for 3 core use cases. The first is interactivity at any scale. The second is high concurrency at the best economics. And the third is the ability to analyze both streaming and historical data at the same time at scale. And so as a developer team thinks about their use cases, they got to think about, are you going to deliver the experience that your end users are expecting? Are you able to deliver the economics that your financial leadership is looking for? And if you're able to deliver the right analytics experiences, then you're going to be successful. And so for that reason, that's why we're excited to partner up with them, because data volumes aren't slowing down and users aren't getting smaller, they're getting larger. And the need for real-time analytics on very fresh data is increasing. So, the response that we have is, let's partner up and help you meet your SLAs.
Excellent. Well, it's been great to chat to you, David. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thanks so much, Phil.